Hello and welcome to Mac Power Users. My name is Steven Robles, joined by my friend and yours, David Sparks. How's it going, David?
Hey, Steven, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about an interesting product category today with a special guest.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Jason Snell. So
Hello.
good to have you back.
Good to be back.
One of the ultimate Mac power users is also an ebook power user. And
I guess.
I think so, man. But every time I want to think about buying a new ebook reader, I go over to Six Colors because you cover it so much. And we thought it'd be fun to share with the audience just kind of a check-in on the state of ebooks and some of our workflows and what we're doing with them. And you're the guy, man.
Okay, well, I'm happy to be that guy. I that is one of the areas where I'm an outlier in my specialty area, but I'm interested in the subject and I use the products. So, one of the beauties of going out on your own is you can sort of decide what you want to cover to a certain extent. And so I actually get a lot, this will probably come up, I get a lot of questions from people about these large format e-readers where you can have a pen and you can take notes. I'm not interested in that category, so I have no opinions about it. Like large e-readers and writing with a pen on an e-reader, I just don't care. Perfectly valid category. They're trying to find more users for this, for e-readers in general. I think getting people to use it as a note-taking device and have it be kind of e-paper is cool and all, but I'm not. I have the luxury of picking my spots, and that is not a spot I'm interested in picking. So I focus on the reading part of readers.
And for folks who don't know, Jason reads a lot of books. So fiction and primarily fiction.
Primarily fiction. There's nonfiction in there too, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, for someone
whatever, 80 or 90 books a year sometimes. I don't know. It's a lot. I did a lot last year. Certainly 50. My Goodreads target is 52 books a year, one a week, and I've been over that.
That's awesome. I also do want to say, follow-up, I watched you on Jeopardy when you were on there, and pretty wild how long the run was of the person who won that game.
Oh, yeah. The guy who beat me, Jamie Ding, won 31 games in a row, and he's the 5th all-time best Jeopardy player, so I don't feel bad about losing to him in a game that was not a runaway, and that if he had gotten... The truth is, if he had gotten the final Jeopardy question wrong and I had gotten it right, I would have beaten him, and the same for my fellow opponent, Jordan. It just so happens that he knew it because he knows everything. But I did read a huge load of mostly sort of like children's books about broad subjects, because that was one of the pieces of advice that I got about studying for Jeopardy. So I was sitting on a beach with an e-reader in Hawaii reading about like the first ladies. That was stuff that I was doing in the run up to being on Jeopardy, was reading a bunch of ebooks about random topics that I might be asked about, including composers, which was the final Jeopardy I lost on. But I went back and looked, and that the trivia bit that was the final Jeopardy question for me was not in that book, The Lives of the Composers. So I was worried that I had read it and forgotten it. And I knew something about that fact through history, but I couldn't place it because classical music is not my thing. And that is an understatement. It is one of my horror categories. But the good news is that the book that I read on the beach about the composers did not actually include that trivia tidbit, so I wasn't going to get it anyway.
Well, I would say, and we watched that whole game live, and me and my wife are musicians, and we actually took 2 semesters of music history as a requirement for our degree, and even the Final Jeopardy tripped us up as well. So
I'll tell you, Jordan, who was on with me from Edmonton, she's an Episcopal priest, and she did her viewing party with people from her church community, including the choir, and not only did the entire choir sing along to the Jeopardy music at the end, but they all knew the answer because they're all classical music people being in a church choir, and they knew that the Brahms Lullaby is the name of the lullaby song that I never knew as anything but the lullaby song, and so I was never going to get that one right.
Yeah, so for folks who aren't up to speed, Jason went on Jeopardy. He did very well, but he got beat by one of the biggest champions in the history of the game. So if you're going to get beat, that's the guy to get beat by, right?
Well, yeah, my narrative kept changing because when we showed up that morning, he was just the guy who won on Friday. So literally, he was a one-time champion. He was the least intimidating you could possibly be because you just won the last game on the previous tape day. And so that was fine. And then and they tape 5 games a day. And on day 2, he set an all-time record for he tied the record for most right answers in a game, and he set an all-time record for a stat called Coriat, which is basically the sum of the money you would earn for correct answers. and that's 42 years of history, and he played basically the best game in history. And that's when everybody in the green room looked at each other and was like, oh no. And then after we left, I lost game 5 to him. He won 31 games. So like the longer it went, the less bad any of us felt about losing to Jamie, because he was he's just he's an all-time great player. So, but it was a fun experience, really a life list kind of experience. I gotta take a picture with Ken Jennings and tell an anecdote. I told the anecdote about getting a hands-on briefing with the iPhone the day after it was announced,
Yes.
and months before anybody else got the final unit. And that's a fun story that you always wonder, if I'm going to go on TV and they ask me one anecdote from my life, what's it going to be? And it turns out it was the iPhone anecdote that they liked. So that was a fun story to tell on TV.
Probably give them a list, right? They choose.
Well, yeah, you give them a list, and then there's a questionnaire, so that if the items you came up with are bad, they ask you a bunch of leading questions, and you fill out this PDF, and then on the day they give you a card with 5 of them that they've selected, and those are the ones that they've chosen, and that's the card Ken Jennings holds when he's talking to you. And then they walk through a couple of them and have you kind of tell that story in the morning before the taping, and they decide on the one that they like, and they circle that one, and so that was the one that they picked. I thought for a long time that they were going to pick the fact that when the iPod was introduced, not 6 months goes by where somebody doesn't send me an email or a text saying, is that you in the iPod launch video? And the answer is yes. I am prominently featured in the audience of the iPod launch video. It is me. It is still me. But I think the iPhone has a little more modern currency than the iPod at this point. So they went with that one.
Well, getting back to the topic of reading, so you're not interested in the big notebook style devices.
Sorry.
I will just weigh in on that real quickly. Everybody in the audience, by everybody, a lot of you keep telling me how useful these e-ink writing devices are. I have now 3 times purchased one and returned it, and I have just realized that I should be on a list where I'm not allowed to buy them because they do nothing for me. I would rather use paper and pencil or digital tools. And I know the emails are going to come because I said this, but I just cannot get into those devices.
I get why people like them, although I would say, as I have a 13-inch iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil, and the truth is, if I even had a glimmer of that, I would think of it. But I was a kid who had bad handwriting. I never have felt comfortable holding a pencil or a pen. For me, the greatest joy of discovering computers was that I could type outwards instead of writing them by hand. And so the idea, I find no comfort in writing notes by hand. And I understand that a lot of people do, and that's great. And if I was back in college, I obviously took notes by hand, and I can do it. And if I could do that on an iPad today, that would make me like, well, would it be better to do something on a different kind of device than an iPad? But the truth is that mode just isn't of any interest to me at all. I take notes on a computer or an iPad or my phone by typing in words. I do bring a notepad with me sometimes to like interviews and stuff, and I scribble things down. But even then, I wouldn't want to be in the moment of like being a journalist or interviewing somebody. I would not want to fuss with anybody's software. So a pencil or pen and paper for that.
I also want all my notes in one place, because part of the power of doing that is then searchability, and now with some of the AI tools, just being able to synthesize all that information. And while you could write even with an iPad, Apple Pencil, and make that into searchable or even printed text, why? I mean,
that stuff does get. I mean, all that stuff does get indexed now, whether it's on an e-reader or on the iPad. There is handwriting recognition that puts that somewhere where you can search it and all of that. Like, you can do it, and for some people, I think that's I love the fact that if you're somebody who's most comfortable putting a stylus on a flat plane and writing out words, and that is the thing that really hones your thoughts or allows you to collect information, that it's no longer a dead end. I love that. It's just not something that I'm interested in at all.
And I'll also say, my co-host Jason, he uses the Remarkable. He has the one that's almost like a handheld type Remarkable tablet, because it's more of like a notepad, more portable. But for me personally, like both of you, none of those devices have appealed to me, because also if I want an e-reader, I don't want a multi-device. I don't want something that can do multiple things, because reading is something that I want to focus on.
Which
Yeah, go ahead.
I think actually brings us to one of the most important points whenever I talk about e-readers, which is people say, you have an iPad and an iPhone, why have another device? Why have a unitasker? And my answer is that the unitasker is the point for exactly the point you made, which is I like to buy a reading device that is just a reading device. And really, it's just a text reading device. Like there are color e-readers now. I have one. I use it. The color is irrelevant to me. It really is text on a page for reading text on a page. For comics, I will read an iPad because I would rather look at my OLED screen on my iPad Pro to read a comic book that's in full color and is awesome and beautiful. But like for text on a page, I know that there are focus modes, right? Like this is Mac power users. I know about focus modes and all of that. But the fact is, even with focus modes, a multitasking device where you know that everything else on the internet is a swipe away is really different than a device that is a unitasker that's really just for reading. And in addition to that, like it's reflective light instead of a backlight, so it's easier on the eyes. You can crank it down really low if you're reading in bed at night. It's got a very simple interface, and the battery lasts forever. So like there are lots of reasons to have an e-reader, but that is, for me, the number one reason is I like putting my iPad down at the end of the day and picking up the e-reader before I go to sleep and reading a few chapters of a book, and there is no push notification. There's no temptation to check my email or to look at social media or to look at Slack. I'm just reading a book at that point. And again, doesn't have to be the approach for everybody, but that's why I like it, is that it doesn't do anything else.
And I actually go all the way to the analog spectrum. So when I read books, I buy the physical book and I have it shipped to my house and I read the tree in my hands. And one of the things I've wanted to use e-readers for, and maybe by the end of this conversation I'll try a different one, is for like highlighting passages or saving parts of the book for later, whether it's quotes. And so the elaborate system I've come up with is basically a shortcut where I will take pictures of the pages that I want to remember something from, and I have a shortcut that I can run, and I save those photos for every single book into an album. So I'll have a photo album for the book 4,000 Weeks, and then I'll take a shortcut, run it on that album, and it pulls all the text from all the pages that I took pictures of, parses it using Apple Intelligence and the ChatGPT extension, and just makes a bare note with pull quotes and good points. And then I can always look back at the photos and search them, because photos will search the text as well,
right,
if there's something I wanted to find again.
That's very impressive, although I'll say you could also invest in like a highlighter pen and some bookmarks, and like you could dog ear some pages, and you could do it that way too. But yours is more high tech, which I appreciate. So,
I can't dog ear pages. It hurts me to dog ear pages.
I know. Well, I mean, yeah, or you get some Post-its. Like there are lots of analog techniques, but I get what you're saying, which is you're snapping interesting things, and then those are getting converted to text, and then you've captured your interesting things. Right. What pushed me, again, since we're kind of laying the groundwork here, one of the things that pushed me over into ebooks is I would take trips where I was in the middle of a hardcover that weighed 7 pounds, and I was only but I was like 3/4 of the way through it, but it was the book I was reading, so I'd take it with me and I'd like finish it on the plane, and then it's just like I'm carrying it around and I'm carrying it home when I'm done. And I realized like you can put 40 books on an e-reader and the bytes don't make it any heavier. So I think that's a great advantage. And I recently read a book in paper, which is rare for me, but it's a book that came out in the UK, and you could order the physical book on Amazon from the UK and it'll ship it to you. But for e-reading, it's locked to the region, so it's not available if you're in America. And so I bought the physical book because it's an author I really like. It's a sequel to a book I really loved. And I read that in paper. And what it reminded me is, yeah, it is like, oh, I got to hold it, and then like it's got two, and I got to move my head, and then I got to physically switch. But what really got me about it is paper books don't light themselves, and you can get a book light and all of that, but I read a lot at night in the dark where my wife is already asleep. And also, frankly, the lighting in my house isn't really great for reading books a lot of the time. You're like, I got to turn the lights on brighter, and I got to angle the book to get the light. And like ebooks, they light themselves now. The original Kindles didn't do that, by the way. It was really embarrassing, but they do now, and that's really good. And so that's another reason why I kind of have let paper books go by the wayside.
I wonder if it's generational too. Like for me, I carried 100 pounds of law books when I was in school, and like I have carried books and read physical books for, the first half of my life, and I'm okay not doing that again. Whereas I think for people who grew up with ebooks, there's a romance to physical books that I don't feel.
I think that's true in general. I think there are a lot of people who love, like, I love books. My wife is a librarian, okay? I love books.
Yeah.
We have a lot of books. The books I buy now tend to be coffee table books, photography books, comic book hardcover collections that are just gorgeous. Absolutely, I still buy books, but what I don't buy is, cheaper, just text on a page books, because I'd much rather have the portability for those. And yeah, I mean, your law books is very similar to my. I'm reading a 1,000-page long Neil Stephenson book, and I'm going to Hawaii, and I had to lug this thing with me, which is literally what happened. The last big hardcover book I traveled with right before I bought my first Kindle was a Neil Stephenson Cryptonomicon or something. It was like 1,000 pages long. I looked up the weight of it, and it's like it was like 5 pounds or something. It's just like, forget it. So I have no nostalgia for that, but I don't blame people who want to feel connected to the book in some way and who like having books on shelves in their house. I mean, again, I do have books on shelves in my house, but if I'm reading at night, like, I had to find a book light and clip it on when I was reading that one book in paper, and I was like, this is why I don't do this.
I will say that I didn't carry a lot of books in college, but I carried a lot of sheet music. And so and I do like digital sheet music now on iPad. But I will say I do have nostalgia for books because when I first entered the Apple world, I learned by books. And I still have my original Final Cut Express HD manual that I bought from Barnes & Noble.
Good times.
Because it was that book. That's literally, I literally learned from that and the Adobe Photoshop book. And so I do have some nostalgia for the physical maybe.
Yeah, I got it. And I on the internet, everything's taken to an extreme. I think you like what you like. If you want to take notes with a pen, you should do that. If you want to read paper books, you should do that. What I really like is that we now have other options that sometimes a lot of people will find superior, and I think that's a good thing. And yeah, if you're reading nonfiction, especially, although I do this because I do podcasts about a lot of the books I read for the Incomparable, so like highlighting passages that are interesting in order to get that highlights file out later, or even taking a brief note. I also have a bunch of friends who are novelists, and I get the ebooks from them when they're working on them, like a beta version of the book. And that's also great for similar reasons. I can select and put a little note in that is, cryptic, but enough for me to expand on it when I finally send my my notes back to them. So there are lots of great uses of this sort of thing, and that's why I've kind of adopted it. I'm a big fan.
I would like to talk about the ecosystems because I am a bit out of touch. I rage quit Kindle when they said they wouldn't let me download the books anymore. I've been buying books from Kobo, but I have not bought a reader from them. I just read them on my phone. I don't know, Jason, what is out there now if someone wants to get into ebooks?
Well, a lot of people are on Kindle, and I hear that when I recommend other readers that are not Amazon's readers. That's what I hear from a lot of people is they feel like they're locked in. Yeah. What I would say to that is, first off, is like there are better Kindles than there used to be. The Kindle software was a joke for a very long time, and it's much, much better now. My big problem with Amazon is that they don't make a reader with physical page turn buttons anymore, which I'm a big fan of. I really like the idea of resting my finger on a button and then going click, click, click instead of having to like move my finger over and tap and make sure I tap right and then move it back. And it's just a little affordance, but and I guess it's kind of a luxury. I don't consider it a luxury, but Amazon sort of first they considered it a luxury and then they just stopped making it altogether. And that bugs me, but they have some very good, like the Paperwhite is a really good, fairly affordable reader. The signature edition of that has an accelerometer in it so that if you really want a physical page turn experience, you can double tap the back with your finger and it will turn the page, which is kind of nice that they did that. But also I felt like I didn't really feel good in the Kindle ecosystem. So the first thing I'll say is if you've got a lot of Kindle books and so you can't imagine giving them up, if you have a Kindle or a device that uses a Kindle app, you can keep your Kindle books, right? Like I think there's nothing stopping you from keeping your old e-reader around unless it breaks. Although even then you could probably find a used Kindle that still connects to Amazon. And as long as you've got a Kindle, to read, if you want to revisit an old book on your Kindle or on your iPhone or on your iPad, you can do that. So I think that it's not as dire a situation as it might be, because you can keep it around. I keep an old Kindle around. I mean, I have a lot of old Kindles, but I keep some around. And if there's a book that's on the Kindle, I'll go read it on the Kindle. Also, there is a world of like DRM removal out there that is technically illegal. I think it's fair use. And if you have a physical Kindle, it's easier to do that, although Amazon makes it increasingly hard. But there's also just, keep your old Kindle around and get a new e-reader. So I think it's not as big a barrier as maybe people make it out to be. Kobo is the big competitor. I have looked at some of the others. In Europe, there are some other competitors that are not really available in America. Kobo is it's a Canadian company. There is a misconception that Amazon has all the books. The Kobo store has all the books too. They're generally at the exact same price. I think Kobo has a price guarantee, so that like if it's cheaper at Kindle, you can take a screenshot and say, give me a refund of the difference, and they will do that. So there's a lot to be said for that. And Kobo's hardware is really good. That's the other big thing about it. Kobo hardware is really good. They have the one I'm using is the Kobo, I think it's the Libra, is it the Libra Colour? Mm-hmm. Which is like, I preferred the Kobo Libra 2, which was replaced by the Libra Colour, because to get color on an e-ink screen, the contrast is a little bit worse. But the fact is, they're not selling that. They're only selling the color version. And that is, at this point, that's my favorite e-reader, is the Kobo Libra Colour. There are some other really good Kobos that are larger. That one is the sweet spot for me. I think my wife is using a Kobo Sage, which is a little bit larger. And so it's more like a trade paperback instead of a paperback, I guess.
Currently sold out, side note.
Yeah, I think they're going to replace it with something. This is what concerns me, is that I worry about what Kobo is doing in terms of their e-reader priorities. But I think that that the Libra is the sweet spot right now if you're looking for something other than a Kindle. If you're looking for a Kindle, I would look at the Paperwhite. I think the Paperwhite is the sweet spot there. It's a good product. It's just, it's Amazon. There are a lot of things about Amazon that I don't love. It's better than it used to be, but I have had no issues going to Kobo from Kindle. They both, also I will say, they both do a good job of supporting libraries, which didn't used to be the case. It used to be that Kindle was much worse at libraries than Kobo. Kindle is in some ways better than Kobo now in terms of libraries, but basically they both will support using Overdrive with your local library. And that's a side tip here, is if you don't have a library card from your local library, you should get one, because libraries lend out ebooks in addition to paper books.
And audiobooks.
And the best app nobody's ever heard of is called Libby, which is the app that is the front end for that. And you log in with your library card, and you can use it to listen to audiobooks. And it's a good audiobook app. And you can use it to hold and check out ebooks. And then once you log in on your Kindle, you go to the Amazon website and press a button and it gets sent to your Kindle. On Kobo, you log into your library on your Kobo. And then when you check out a book on Libby and you sync your Kobo, the book shows up. And so it's just kind of instantaneous that way. You can also actually browse your library on Kobo, which is a unique feature of Kobo. But to be honest, browsing through web pages on an e-reader is no fun, and the Libby app is great. So if you're on an iPhone or iPad or whatever, the Libby app is awesome, and then you can just send those to your device and read a book. It's really great.
I'll also shout out the Hoopla app, just because my wife uses this like the heck out of Hoopla. Like anytime she hears a book recommendation, she'll just go directly to the Hoopla app, and 9 times out of 10 it's the same thing. You give it your public library card or register it, and then you can just listen to the audiobook, and it just go, and it's free.
Yeah, which is, I guess, technically audiobooks are kind of at this point e-reading of a different kind. But yeah, there is, don't sleep on the library is what I'm saying. You may have, Hoopla also gives you access to like movies and stuff that you just get for free with your library card, which is pretty great. So, but I think a lot of people think of the library as being whatever it was when they were a kid, and it's like books on shelves and stuff, which is still all there. My wife is a librarian, it's all still there. But it's also ebooks and audiobooks, and yeah, if you're not using the Libby app, you should be, because you will get. I read a lot of books checked out from the library now that I don't have to buy, and that's always my first stop. Is I heard about this new book, and I'll put it on hold at the library. And if I just can't wait, I'll buy it on Kobo. But a lot of times, it's actually kind of funny to play. It's fun to play library roulette, where you got a stack of a stack of holds, and then weeks will pass, and you'll get a push notification from Libby that says, "Oh, this book out of that stack, this random book is the one that's up next," and you're like, "Great, let's check it out." And that's kind of fun to have it's a list you built, but after weeks go by, you're like, you don't even remember what's on that list, and you're adding to it all the time, and then things will just pop up, and you can read that ebook right then. It's pretty great. Or audiobook.
One of my favorite things to do when I visit a city, if I have extra time, is like go to a library. And in the state of California, as a result, I've collected a collection of library cards, which gives me even more power in those applications with ebooks. But interesting, when you travel, like I went to Edinburgh last year, they wouldn't give me a library card because I was a Yankee.
The rules change. Like here in the Bay Area, if you live in the Bay Area, you can walk into the San Francisco library and get an SFPL card. And one of the nice things about Libby is if your library does reciprocal with other libraries, or if you get a library card at another library, you can add them all to Libby, and it will do some intelligent matching of like, this book is actually available at this other library sooner, and they'll let you put it on hold there or check it out. But yeah, it's bibliotourism. Being married to a librarian, I have been to lots of libraries around the world.
I bet.
There's actually a really fun community on TikTok of librarians and libraries trying to do like super trendy or, take advantage of whatever's going viral right now, but then like show that you should read a book and go to your local library. And it's pretty great. I kind of love it. I also wanted to mention with Kindle, before we get too far away, I did have the occasion, I bought e-readers for my 2 younger kids this past holidays, and I did get Kindles, and I actually got my middle son a Kindle Color Soft because he enjoys reading manga. And I was like, this is going to be great. Like, he can actually see the colors and stuff. And I would just caution anyone, if you're wanting to get a color e-reader, make sure that the actual things you're going to read are in color and provided in color, because we came to realize that all the manga he reads is just black and white.
It's like black and white.
Yeah. The color is cover, or the cover is color on like the Kindle Color Soft, but then as soon as you open it, it's black and white.
Yeah, a lot of manga is black and white. Yeah, it's also true that the colors in a color e-reader are muted.
Yeah.
I've heard people say, yeah, but you get those book covers, and then when you turn off your reader, the book cover is in color. And it's like, yeah, but the backlight goes off and you can't see it, and it's muddy. So it's a momentary. I question, unless you're somebody, this is a use case. If you're a highlighter person and you highlight different things in different colors, it's really great because you can now highlight in 6 different colors. And so you've got your little virtual highlighter pens there, and that can be a signal later. But for comics, the other problem is the size. A lot of comics are just meant for a format that's larger, which is why I think an iPad is much superior to any e-reader, especially a smaller e-reader, because, I have read comics on my Kobo mostly as a test and on the Kindle Color Soft, but like really for it to be readable, you got to zoom in, and then you're using an interface, then you're like panning around within the page, and then it's not as fun as just having a page in front of you. So be really wary about comics and color on e-readers, because it will look. I have no doubt that the ultimate comic book reading or manga reading e-reader is going to happen, that they will make one that is really nice color and is really large, so you can not have to resize the image. But it's going to be a while, and at that point, I still think you'd be better off with an iPad.
Topic of color, I just want to follow up. The Kobo, because I'm thinking about getting an e-reader. It's been a long time since I've used one. I just use my iPad generally. And so the Kobo is of interest to me, but when you say the one you have has color on it, to me, that is a concern, because I actually just want the text to be super sharp. Does adding color to that Kobo compromise the actual text?
I mean, it is. So if I did a review of it where I did a zoom in on the Libra 2 and the Libra Color, and you can see that in the Libra Color, there is a kind of, it's a little bit grayer in the background, and it's actually like a fine dot pattern on the device. In practice, I've been using the Libra Color as my primary e-reader for the last year, and the truth is, it isn't an issue. The text is just as crisp. It's just that the background is not as kind of like white. It's a little grayer, but it's already a little gray. It's just a matter of being slightly grayer more than anything else. So I don't think it's a big issue. And the thing is, really, the color is irrelevant. The text is all in black and white and reads very clearly. The color DPI on these displays is actually lower, but the black and white DPI is still high. So it doesn't, I would say what I don't like about it is it's a step back, that if you don't care about color, you're getting a display that is not as crisp as the old one was in terms of the contrast anyway. But the truth is, in practice, using it day to day, it's fine.
Yeah. Does that affect battery life as well?
No.
Okay.
E-ink screen's just a little bit different, but the battery life on these things is enormous. I mean, that's part of the beauty of it, is that ebooks aren't very big, so you can load dozens of books on it, and the battery will last you. If you turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, like, it'll last you, at least a week, if not more. There's enormous standby time and enormous reading time. So that's one of the things I love about it, is that the battery life is so long.
So you've already talked about some multi-devices like taking notes in e-readers, and you don't prefer those. I'm curious if you've tried things like the Boox Palma 2 Pro. I got one of these and was like, oh, this will be like a little e-reader, and it'll have a camera, and I can install Pocket Casts, and I can literally listen to podcasts on it. And then I found myself never picking it up.
So I've reviewed a bunch of the Boox readers. Boox is a Chinese company that is taking stock Android parts and making e-readers out of them. So stock Android parts and stock e-ink parts, and using Android as the backing. And then they try to do some customization. What's funny is I've been reviewing their stuff for a while now, and the first stuff that they sent me was really bad. Like, the hardware was good, but the software was just, it's Android. It thinks it's a phone, even though it's not. Right. And what's happened over time is that they have gotten better at modifying Android, and they have gotten, I think, basically not only their own apps, but partnerships with other apps to say, we really want you to do like an e-ink mode where, it, like, because if you're running Android, first off, it always assumes you're on a color LCD screen phone. So the problems is it's black and white, or it's a very limited color palette. And what you really want is not to scroll. You want page refresh, because you can't scroll an e-ink screen. The refresh rate is so slow. If you try on that Boox Palma, and an app that wants to scroll, and you do this, it's just this smear that happens and a bunch of flashes, and eventually it settles down. It's really bad. So they've gotten a lot better over time with it. And the Palma, so they make ones that are the exact same size as a Kobo and a Kindle, and have page turn buttons on them, and are pretty good. The problem is, it all requires something to be a little, you need to be a little more nerdy, because you got to log into the Google Play Store, and you might need to go to the Play Store and download some apps and configure them right. And there's like shortcuts of like long presses to get things. It's not the beauty of Kindle and Kobo, both of which I think are based on Android, is they only really run one app, and it's the app you use for everything all the time. And like, you see nothing beyond that. And with books, you have to use Android. And I'm not saying anything pejorative about Android. I'm just saying you need to be a little more technically astute in order to do it. And then early on, I found that the quality, even being fairly technically astute, was not great. It's a lot better. What makes the Palma interesting is it's the shape of a phone, and that means it's much more pocketable. And I like that about it. I also in practice don't use it very much, because the phone size is less comfortable in my hand, and because it's from a phone. The page turn buttons are the volume control buttons on the side, which means that you're kind of like gripping it in your claw, and then you need to get a finger right on the button so you can press the next page button. And like, I know that's a little thing, but ergonomics matter. And like the thin and light and a little bit wider e-ink readers from Amazon and Kobo are, I think, nicer to hold in the hand than the shape of a smartphone. And you already have a smartphone, right? So you get the Boox Palma, and now you get two smartphones in your pockets. Like, I love the idea of it, but and I think that there are people for whom it is perfect because it is smaller, because it is so pocketable. But it is, there's. I feel like I hope there's enough of a market. I think the problem is the market isn't big enough, because like I feel like there is room for somebody to make a better e-ink reader that is based on Android but has more apps on it. Like I would be really, I mean, I wish Kindle and Kobo would do this, but they won't, which is I would love an RSS reader on my e-reader
Yes.
where I could read articles, because that is also just reading text on a screen, and I do that on my iPad instead. But like I'm intrigued by that kind of idea, but that requires extensibility that Kobo and Kindle are never going to give me. So an Android e-reader that's a little more extensible but pretty easy to use would be really nice. I just don't know if there are enough people in that market, although Boox is trying. Boox is the company that's trying there.
That's been my white whale. I'm a big fan of the Readwise service, and so much so that I use their reader app. So my RSS feed is also in their app, and I've loaded a lot of my ebooks into it. So it's like the one stop for me.
I will, to give Kobo credit, they used to have a partnership with Pocket, and Pocket went out of business. They now have a partnership with Instapaper. So all your Instapaper articles will sync to the Kobo, and the Kobo also has Dropbox support. So any PDF or ebook file or anything else you drop in a particular folder on Dropbox will also be loadable. So it's better, but the actual like what you have is what they give you, and that's all you get. You can't install an extra thing on a Kobo or a Kindle. It's just not what they want you to do.
So my white whale is a e-reader that also runs the Readwise reader, which exists in Android.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right.
I bought one of the Boox readers and I installed it, and the experience was terrible.
Right, because
and
it thinks it's a phone, and it's not.
Yeah.
And unless the developer modifies it, that's the real challenge right now. Is that as extensible as Android is, the bottom line is you need to you need developers who are aware that they might be running on an e-ink reader, and very few of them are. There's some open source projects or some very small like indie Android developers who really see the value in it. There's a really good generic ebook reader called Moon Plus on Android that's very good, that I use when I'm using the Boox one. There's another reader I want to mention, which is not an ecosystem as much as just a piece of hardware. I know Steven has one of these too, which is this company called XTE Inc. out of China, and they are making these. They have a little tiny, they're teeny tiny e-readers. There's a thing called the X4, and then they now have one that's called the X3. X3 is small enough that you can actually like attach it magnetically to the back of your iPhone. The X4 is a little too big for modern iPhones. It's sort of like for the iPhone 15
in a crucifix position.
Yes, you can do it sideways. It used to be that some of like that. I think the Pro Max 16 you could do it upright, but now you can't. It is. So it's super primitive. It's based on an ESP32 processor, so it's not running an OS as we would think of it. It's more like an embedded system kind of thing. And so negatives. It doesn't have a light on it, so you have to have a light or lighting or be outside to read on it. But it's incredibly small. I think if they put a light on it, it would be over the top, actually, how great it would be. But
also,
it's still
no
pretty
touch
good.
screen. I think, to be clear, no touch screen.
No touch screen, although I don't mind that because it's got, I love buttons, Stephen. This thing's got so many buttons on it. It's got too many buttons, in fact. It's got.
But also, getting stuff onto it. How do you do it? Because I had to do the micro SD card thing. And
so here's the secret with this. I got one of these, and I was going to write a review of it, and I thought, I can't, because all I'm going to do is kick it because the software is so bad.
Exactly. Right.
Turns out there's an open source project called Crosspoint.
Yes.
Which
someone commented on my video, and they were like, just flash this other ROM.
No,
and I'm like,
seriously. So Crosspoint is what you need to install on this thing.
Okay.
It's so good. It transforms this thing from a bad product into an actual good product.
Okay.
And the idea of flashing firmware seems super repellent, except this is the amazing thing. You go to the Crosspoint website, you plug in this thing to your computer via USB. Go to the Crosspoint website in Chrome. There's a button you click that says upload the firmware. From Chrome, it attaches via USB, flashes the firmware, and then it reboots, and now it's using Crosspoint, which is really good software designed for this thing by this open source project. And at that point, there are lots of ways to get books on there, including Wi-Fi. You can connect it to Wi-Fi. You can set it up if you're using the Calibre e-reader software on your Mac. You can actually set it up to sync wirelessly with Calibre and sideload books that way. There are lots of ways to do it once you get Crosspoint on there. So I highly recommend that if people want to try it. These e-readers are really cheap. It's like $50, $60.
Yeah.
The drawback is they don't light themselves, which is, I mean, you're going to need, and they're so small you can't really clip on a book light because it would just tip the whole thing and break it in half practically. It's so thin and small.
Side note, is the Nook still a thing? The Nook e-reader?
It's out there. Barnes & Noble is the partner for that. I bought one to try it out last year, and I returned it because I feel like it's just behind the times and not getting the effort that Kobo is as a Kindle alternative. It is out there, and they're using Barnes & Noble as their partner for books and stuff, but I didn't think it was I wasn't very impressed with it. Kobo, by the way, Kobo's big partner is Walmart. You can actually log into Kobo with your Kobo ID or your Walmart ID, which is kind of interesting. So they also have a partnership, and I assume you can buy a Kobo at Walmart. But anyway, XT Ink is really interesting and fun, and I wonder if maybe there's I've heard from a lot of people who say they love it because they can like ride the bus or the train or whatever and just keep this in their pocket, and like it's nothing. It's like it's not like a credit card, but it's kind of like a credit card or something. It's super small. And there's a lot.
What's the difference between that and just reading it on your phone at that point?
This is way lighter and the battery lasts forever.
It's
those are really the reasons why, and it's an e-ink screen. But yes, I think it is fair to say that for a large chunk of people, you might as well just read it on your phone. Period. I just don't look when I'm in the waiting room at the doctor's office. I read on my phone. I do, but I'd rather not. Like I don't like it as much as reading it on an e-reader. I don't like the backlight. I don't like the interface as well. But it's true that like to be interested in e-readers at all, you have to take that first step, which is maybe I want something that isn't just reading on my phone or my iPad. It's true.
And before we get too far away, I just want to mention I have literally scrolled Instagram Reels on the e-ink display of the Boox Palma 2 Pro. And you really haven't lived until you've seen this egregious display.
Yeah, and that's the one with the good refresh rate. The
exactly.
one that I have, the refresh rate is even worse than that. So yeah,
it's wild.
And then there's another one that I see often is the Daylight, which is almost like an iPad competitor. It's not really an e-ink, I believe, technology in that one. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah, there's a lot out there there are a lot of companies that are trying this thing where they're using a standard phone or tablet technology, and then they do a layer on the screen that's like a glare screen reducer. To make it, and then they put it in a black and white mode, especially, and they make it feel like an e-reader, but it's just a tablet at that point. And I mean, if I got one, it was a TCL maybe made a tablet that they said was like that, and it was just an Android tablet with a high contrast black and white mode and a special screen treatment. I'm really skeptical of that, although it does make me wonder if there's something in, should you just get an iPad with the anti-glare coating on it and do that? And the answer is that would be pretty great, other than the fact that the iPad's going to be bigger than an e-reader and its battery is going to die after a day.
Yeah, I mean, that really is like I was talking earlier about. I would love to have an e-reader that ran Readwise and could read my books on, but I just feel like every time I look, I don't see it, and I ultimately just end up going back to my iPad mini. But I have hope. I feel like they'll get there. And I think you're right. Largely, it's a software problem. I thought it'd be fun. And then, do you guys want to talk about reading workflows? Because you read, a lot of books, Jason. What's the method? I guess download it and read it on your ebook.
Yeah. I mean, Libby books at the library is step one. If I hear about a book, I go and see if it's at the library, and then if it's not, or if it's going to be a long time, or if I have a deadline because I want to talk about it on a podcast, I will go to the Kobo store and I'll buy it there and just load it on my Kobo. I will admit that I also use Calibre, which gives me the ability to take DRM-free ebooks, or it lets me back my ebooks up. So I'm not a book pirate, but I will pull my purchases off of my Kobo into Calibre, so I have them without DRM, and that also means they're searchable and stuff, which is great. On my Mac, I can pull them out because at that point it's just an EPUB. But basically, the workflow is just step 1 Libby, step 2 Kobo Store, and I'll usually do that on my Mac or my iPad. And then when I get to the Kobo, all I'm doing is a sync. And if they're not already there, if they haven't already auto-synced, I will force a sync, and then they're there, and I read them that way. And that's kind of the whole workflow. And then I guess at the end of it, there's a if it's something I'm taking notes on, there's there's like an export process where you plug it in and pull the notes file off so that you can read that. And that's not like super user friendly, but you can do it.
I'm curious, do you, when and where, like, because you have a goal of reading so many books in a year, do you actually schedule time? Is there just natural time within your week that it happens? Is there a regular time every day? What does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, end of the day, when I go back to bed, I will read for a while until I'm too sleepy. And then I will put the Kobo down and go to sleep. So that's number one. And then like, otherwise it's like, maybe if I'm really into something on the weekends, I will, sit and read for a while. And then, airplanes. I realize that I spend all this time loading movies and TV shows onto my iPad to watch on the plane. And then even if I'm going to London or something, I'll spend most of the time just sitting there reading a book. I'll read like multiple books on a flight sometimes if it's a long flight. And I love it. Like, I put my AirPods in, I'm listening to music. I have my Kobo, and again, the long life, it's not going to run out of battery, and I will just read so much. So on trips, and then downtime when I'm on a trip, especially if it's a vacation, like when I go to Hawaii, for example, if I'm not studying for Jeopardy anyway, I will read an enormous amount of books in those situations. But during like regular everyday life, it's mostly before I go to bed, and some on weekends is mostly when I do it.
What kind of music do you listen to when you read? Like lyrics? Is there music with lyrics?
Yeah, for me, the rule is, so this is funny because people process music in different ways. And I hear from people who are like, I only listen to soundtracks. I only listen to instrumentals. And for me, that's not the barrier. The barrier is I listen to music I'm familiar with. I can write to music. In fact, I write to music a lot. And it's a way for me to like charge up my writing. And that music has lyrics, but it's music I know by heart. And so the lyrics don't intrude. It's just music I know by heart. And
you're getting
for
the
reading,
emotion, not the words.
But yeah, I mean, this is one of my challenges is people come out with artists I like come out with new albums. That is hard because I have to find a time to listen to it where I can pay attention to it, because that I can't listen to while I'm reading because I'll just get distracted by listening to the music. But once it's in a playlist that I've listened to a million times before when I'm working, at that point, that's perfect. And I will often, I'll choose one that sort of fits whatever my mood is at the time, and then I'll read that way.
So, and last thing for me, when you're books you want to read, I know you split the Libby app, you get a push notification this book is available. Do you have a place where you track books specifically that you want to read soon? And do you track books that you have read aside from just in your Kobo reader? Because there's lots of apps now where you can just track that stuff. Do you do that?
I don't have an incoming tracking unless it's for like a project. So like the Incomparable, we do all of the shortlisted Hugo and Nebula nominees. So it's basically the 2 shortlists for sci-fi fantasy books of the year. And I read those every year, and I have done that for like 15 years now. And that's usually a list of like 7 to 11 books. And I do keep that because I want to make sure that I'm making progress and that like I know which ones we're covering in the next episode. So we just did an episode with 3 of them, and I know what the next 3 are, and I am currently reading number 3 of those, and I've got a little checkbox that says these ones I've already read because I'd already read some of them when the nominations came out.
Is that reminders though? Where is that?
That is in Notes.
Just Apple Notes.
It's Apple Notes with checkboxes. But that's rare. Generally, I don't plan it like that. I just I've got a lot of books that I bought that are just sitting on my Kobo. I mean, that's part of it, is that sometimes I buy a book and then I have at any given time 5 or 6 books just sitting there that I could read next. And when I get to the end of the book, I sometimes, unless I've got an assignment coming, I will just kind of like shop. And then when a book comes up on Libby, there's a little more tension there because it's like, well, this one you got to return in 14 days. And then it becomes like, do I defer it or do I take it? And if I take it, I read it and it's next in the queue. But it's kind of catch as catch can for that. I log everything on Goodreads. I know there are a bunch of alternatives to Goodreads out there. I don't love Goodreads, but Goodreads does exactly what I want. It actually kind of works like Letterboxd for movies for me, where like the number one reason I want to do it is I want to press log and type in the book and maybe give it a star rating and then be done. And so Goodreads does that for me. And then, I do the Goodreads challenge. So I set myself a target and it can tell me if I'm on target or not. But invariably, if I'm not on target, then I go on a vacation and then I'm way past target. And one of the nice things about the Hugo Awards is I usually read all the nominated novellas, so a little bit shorter, and those all count. So in the summer when I'm reading the awards fiction, I will get a bunch of those aren't the 1,000-page books, so those ones go fast, and that's kind of nice. I can load up my my book count that way, lard that up a little bit. And this year it's not going to be a problem because of all those children's books. I logged all those too, so those all count.
I have the most antiquated method of my list. So, David, I want to hear if I beat yours too. How do you keep track, David, of your books you want to read or have?
I don't have a list. I do have a pile of books that I've bought. And a lot of times the resource is the Incomparable podcast because Jason does such a good job covering it. I don't read all the Nebula nominees, but you guys always pick one or two and you describe them enough to know which ones will resonate with me. And so I get those, and I've got those. I do a lot of fiction on audiobook, because that's what I do when I'm gardening or driving. I like to listen to fiction. For nonfiction books, I'm an aggressive user of Readwise service. So you can highlight them, and then it gives you spaced repetition on things you've read. I mean, for a nonfiction book, I take it a little more seriously. But fiction, I just get collections from friends and podcasts, and I have favorite authors. And when I'm ready to read a fiction book, I look at my little queue and pick one.
So this is the most ridiculous method, probably the least Mac Power users like. When I hear about a book I want to read, I'll go to the Apple Books app and mark want to read. I'll mark that. So then I have one place that syncs across my Apple devices books I want to read. But when I actually want to get the book to read it, I buy the physical book, I have it shipped to my house, and then my nightstand is my queue. I have like 3 or 4 books stacked up. The top book is the one I'm currently reading. And then sometimes I'm also curious how you guys do this. If you read simultaneously multiple books at the same time. I'm typically a completionist. I have to finish one book before I start the next. But I've been reading The Body Keeps the Score for like the last year. And it's like a heavy book at times. And so like I've read a lot of it, but then I also went to Your Brain on Art book. And so I'll read a couple chapters of that. So my nightstand is my queue, and it's pretty antiquated.
It's very analog. Good for you, I guess. I would say if you're buying the books, especially if you're buying on Amazon, you could just like add them to your Amazon card for later and do it that way.
But sometimes I will also both buy the physical book and buy the digital Apple book version, because if I'm ever traveling, I will want to, if I want to keep reading it.
Yes, you want to carry that physical book with you.
And because I don't have an e-reader that I really love right now and that I have with me, I'll use my Apple devices when I travel.
Yeah.
If I read, and so it's a pretty broken system, but it's been working for me.
It's fine. Not everybody has to do everything the same way. I think. That's
David, are you a simultaneous reader, or are you complete a book and then go to the next one?
I complete a fiction book before I go on to the next one. Nonfiction books and me have a complicated relationship. I will very easily skip large swaths or stop one midstream. And at any time and I also like to read classics. I've been on an Epictetus kick the last 6 months. So I've got a bunch of books in process, but for fiction books, I have to read one to the end, because then I start getting confused. Because I like a lot of like space opera, science fiction stuff, and like, is this the galaxy where they have time travel, or is this the one where they,
it's a real danger. It is.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things I appreciated when Mike and Gray would do book episodes of Cortex, and they would talk about nonfiction books. It helped give me permission to sometimes start a nonfiction book, and when I feel like I've gotten the idea and the author is just kind of rehashing it 15 different ways, like, it's okay to not finish that book.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I have done enough. I've worked enough in publishing, with magazines, and also knowing enough authors, and I have done some book proposals over the years. I know enough that with nonfiction, I can often see what the pitch was and see like that the pitch was this, and the editor was like, it needs to be wider. And they're like, okay, but that's not really the core of what I'm doing, but I'll widen it. And you can see sometimes that it's like, to get this to book length, I'm going to take this idea and iterate on it a couple of times. Sometimes you can see that in books. In fact, a book that I highly recommend, which is Apple in China.
Yes.
I can see the outline in Apple in China. And like, there's a lot in that book that is about like the very earliest days of Apple manufacturing. And like, it sets the stage pretty well, but it's not what the book's about. And I thought, I see what's happening here. I see what this book is doing. And I think that's actually, you did a great tip there, which is like, there are a whole class of nonfiction books where the idea is there's an idea to be gleaned. And a lot of times the book is going to reiterate that idea in different ways, in different shapes, until you get it. And it's okay to say, okay, I get it.
Yeah. I'm just not a fan of a lot of the productivity slop out there, and a lot of it you'll look and you're like, this is an extended blog post turned into a book.
Yep.
And
they wrote a great blog post, and somebody said you should pitch that as a nonfiction book. And the editor said, here's how we stretch that out into a book. And as the reader, you are not obligated to read it.
Yeah. And that was one example.
Yeah,
sorry. Well, that's one of the examples that I use as a book that I love, but actually honestly never finished, was the book Range by David Epstein, because he talks about generalists, and he talks about if you have multiple interests and you pursue them, like, it's okay. Like, being a jack of all trades isn't a bad thing. And for someone like me who had interest in music and tech and podcasts and video, that gave me permission to like do all these things. And he talks about how those generalists sometimes make better leaders and better troubleshooters and problem solvers. And that was like the first 3 chapters. And as I kept reading, I was like, okay, I think I got it.
Yeah.
And I read a little more, and I was like, I think I'm good. Yep. So just put it down. Still recommend. And it's a great book for those, who need that kind of permission like I did, but I didn't need to finish it. I got it.
Well, Jason, I need to make a decision because I am actually interested in trying to go back to an e-reader for some things. I think I'm giving up on the dream of an e-reader that gives me my Readwise highlights and my RSS feeds. So it sounds to me like you recommend Kobo at this point, and I've got a big library of EPUBs that I have that are I can put in any device.
Yeah.
So I guess Kobo's the answer.
I think look at the Kobo Libra Colour. It is the one that I'm using right now. I think it's really good. If you want to do some article reading on it, if you're thinking like what I do is it's long form articles where it's literally that moment. I do a lot of reading on my iPad in the morning, but like I will run into an article on the web during the day and I'll be like, happy for you or sorry that happened, but I ain't reading that. It's that moment of like, oh my God, this article is so long. I will send it to Instapaper and it then goes to my Kobo where later I can say, okay, I'm going to dive into that long article. So that gets you at least some web content that you can put there if there's something you're like, I want to save this for later. This is too much. And then I highly recommend Calibre, which is open source. I think it's open source. It's old. It looks like one of the first Mac apps to be ported from Unix in the 2000s. It's like a really rickety interface.
Almost Windows 95.
But what it's good at is, especially for Kobo, is Kobo supports an enhanced version of EPUB that does some nice things on Kobos, and Calibre has a Kobo plugin and will like convert all EPUBs to what are called keypubs on the fly when it syncs it to your Kobo, and so they'll end up reading better on the Kobo, which is really nice. And then that's also, there's a plugin called OBOK, which I guess is technically illegal, Kobo spelled backward, but it'll do the thing where you can basically take any of the books that you bought on your Kobo and you can put them back in Calibre so that you've got a backup copy of it for later, which I do like to do, even though it's not strictly necessary or legal. I think it's fair use of a thing that I bought.
It's telling that the Calibre website on the homepage, it has a 15-inch G4, I think, a MacBook Pro or something like that with the SuperDrive in the front.
The thing about Calibre is that it gets updated all the time, like literally all the time. There is not a moment that every launch I do of that app, it says there's an update. Like, it's amazing.
That's wild.
But it's also like it feels like it's straight out of like 2004.
Workflow-wise, though, A, what's your current RSS reader? And B, if you come across web content like from Apple News or something, do you send that to Instapaper, or how do you capture that to read somewhere else?
If there's something in Apple News, I'll probably just read it during the day and then move on with my life. I wrote about this on 6 Colors a little bit. My RSS flow is that I only read in the morning, and I am using ReadKit on my iPad to do that. ReadKit is a RSS reader that works for me. It works with Feedbin. I am a Feedbin subscriber, which means technically I can also send articles to Feedbin and they show up in my RSS reader the next morning. But I mostly don't do that. And recently what I did is I realized that I felt overwhelmed because I had this combination of I get a bunch of newsletters and I forward them all to Feedbin. So my newsletters show up in my RSS reader. But then I realized I was also subscribing to these sites that have like 8 posts in a day or 12 posts in a day. And they were overwhelming. Like, there's the newsletter that I really care about, and then it's interspersed with like 10 little posts that I kind of collectively care about. So I actually now have a script that runs every morning at 6:30 in the morning, and it takes the contents of these RSS feeds that I like that have been posted in the last day and turns them into a list of links in an RSS feed that I subscribe to. So instead of having like random article, my newsletter, random article, a newsletter I care about, random article, I have the 2 newsletters, and then I have a thing that's like, here are your tech links, here are your pop culture links, as items, and those items are just a list of links. But that was, for me, that was like a key finding of like, I see what I am overwhelmed by here is like I'm trying to mix and match, and the interface isn't really well suited for that. Now, what I don't want to do is like go through now let's read this folder and now let's read this folder. I wanted like a super simplified interface, and so I've been doing that for a couple weeks now, and I actually really like it. I think that's worked out pretty well, and I may visit Claude Code and try to make it a little more sophisticated, but for now it's a Python script that runs once a day, and it has simplified my morning reading a little bit in ReadKit.
So it's almost like a menu more than it's a reading list.
I mean, you could even argue that it's kind of like I'm building a UI on top of the existing UI, where it's like I want another layer, which is, I want to see my newsletters and these like RSS categories interspersed together at the same level. And like somebody could write an app that does that, right? But like I can't. So instead I hacked RSS to do it for me, where I can just say, like, you can put all the links from 9 to 5 Mac and Mac Stories and Mac Rumors and the the blogs I read about tech. You can put them all in one item and make that item at the same level as my newsletters. And because I realize I only really do read at that level once a day. And so what I really want is a snapshot of what's going on at 6:30 in the morning.
You can actually, we just talked about AI tools on last episode, me and David. And one of the things I've used Claude Cowork for is I've connected Fastmail, which now has a first-party MCP server. And if you do that, you can do exactly what you're saying and create a scheduled task where Claude Cowork looks at all your newsletters and does exactly that. Either creates a list of links and or like summaries of this with links to the newsletter. And I also can use it now to search. So if I say, hey, what were the top links shared in the Pod News newsletter, I can just, like, Claude can just tell me. Like, I don't even have to go to the email. That's pretty cool. I was also going to say, I use a shortcut for something I just want to share with you, Jason, because you're talking about like aggregating news once a day. I do a daily show for members about the tech news, and I've created a shortcut that has a bunch of RSS feeds, like you're saying, and it basically takes all the articles shared for today, published date is today, gives those to AI, tells AI only take unique stories, not ignore duplicates, but if a story is covered across multiple sources, consider it more important. And so it will identify the top stories of the day with that metric, and then it shows me a list of 10 stories in a choose from menu in the shortcut. I select 5 stories, and then it pulls the full body text of that article, sends it through AI to summarize it, and now I have a top 5 tech news story of the day script that I can just read down and create the show.
That is not that far off from what I'm trying to do with my tech fire hose, where it's way too many links, and I do actually want a little bit of LLM work to kind of like group them and dedupe them and rank them. That's really smart. I like it.
There's just a lot of ways to do that now, and the trick is to give it enough context to know your taste, and that just takes some time.
Yeah.
All right, we opened the can of worms of AI. Let's talk about it a little bit. Jason, you've done something interesting with your newsletter. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I have a newsletter for 6 Colors members that is based, the way it works, because I did it myself. So much of 6 Colors is, there's probably a tool that does this now, but a lot of it was built before those tools existed, so I just did it myself. And I decided that I wanted a newsletter that went out automatically. And I'm not on Substack or any of these newsletter platforms. I'm just using WordPress. And there are plugins that'll do it, but it's that you both will know this feeling, which is I could take something off the shelf. It doesn't do it the way I want to do it. I want to do it my way. And so I wrote a Python script by hand this is before the AI coding era. And that looks at my RSS feed for members. It sees if I posted something of substance on that day. It's designed to run every day. And so there's a bunch of checks about like, is there a full post or a member post, or like a little link post or a link to a podcast does not cross the threshold. And if there is, it generates a newsletter. Now it's more complicated, right? If there is on a certain day, it actually has to go back in the RSS feed to previous days to find when the last time something triggered it, so that it doesn't replay things from the past or miss things like a little link post that happened yesterday that otherwise would have been dropped entirely. If there was no newsletter yesterday, it needs to know so that it includes the content from yesterday as well as today. So there's a lot of logic going on there in Python to do all of that based on the RSS feed. Fires at 5 p.m. or 4:45 p.m. Pacific. And then there's a bunch of other stuff in there, like if there are certain tags or if it's above a certain length. My mail provider will not support items above a certain character count. So I have a bunch of like logic that's like, if it's too big, it finds the little read more post text that's in there and cuts it there, and then inserts something that says, this is too big for the newsletter, click to read it on 6 Colors. There's a lot, and I iterated over months on this thing, but it does work, and it's a subscriber benefit. And so people, because what I found with 6 Colors is I want to meet people where they are, especially if they're paying me as a member. So like if they want to read on the web, they can read on the web. If they want to read in RSS, they can read in RSS. And I thought, with the rise of Substack and things that are like it, clearly there is a desire among some audiences to read it in email. And that's absolutely been the case. I hear from people who are like, I'm so glad that you do this email because I don't visit the site every day and I don't expect them to. And they're not doing RSS for whatever reason. Or maybe, like me, they find value in, instead of having like individual posts kind of like trickle through, that when something happens, because otherwise there's no newsletter, at the end of the day, Jason sends me a newsletter with what happened that day. And so that's built up over time. It's got little bits of logic for like where the links go, and if there's like multiple links to podcasts that have been posted, they get kind of concatenated together into a podcast section. It's really nice. And I've been doing that for, I don't even know how long, a couple of years now. I'm very happy with it. I think it's a really nice product that, yes, I have kind of replicated Substack backward from my blog, which is how I wanted to do it. I don't think of the newsletter first. I think of the site first, and then the newsletter is like a summation of what's happened on the site. But it gets me what I think people want. Next step, though, is in terms of coming to people where they are. One of the most popular things, we did it accidentally, but one of the most popular things in our membership for 6 Colors is that Dan Morin and I do a podcast every week that's just for members. And we did it, like I said, kind of on a lark. It's like, let's see what people think, because we have a lot of following from podcasts. And what we were selling people was a website with words written on it. And it turns out that a lot of them, our members really are very podcast forward, at least, and they love the podcast. So I realize now that I have a substantial membership base that is more podcast forward. So I had this thought, which was, what if I could make a podcast out of the newsletter, right? And what I knew immediately from personal experience and friends' experience is there was no way I was going to sit down. Like, I don't even want to put the newsletter together by hand every day. I wanted to spend time writing a script that would auto-generate the newsletter. Wherever I was, whatever I was doing, I didn't have to worry about it. The newsletter got put out. I wanted an automatic podcast of basically my newsletter. How would I do that? And so now we do live in the AI era. So I used my friend Claude, and we looked at my newsletter script, and we walked through, and it was Claude Cowork, I think, to begin with. And we had this, I had this dialogue with Claude where basically I'm saying, okay, here's this newsletter. I want to do a version of this as a podcast. And we had to walk through a bunch of steps, right? So it's like, what's the best available text-to-speech API? Because I'm not going to have somebody read this. A computer needs to read this, but I want it to sound good. And we went through a bunch of iterations. I don't know if you guys have talked about, it's been a past sponsor of mine elsewhere. There's a service called Listen Later, which is kind of like Instapaper, but it does text-to-speech and puts it in a podcast feed instead. So you save an article and it reads it to you in a podcast feed. It's very clever. I was so frustrated with all these different text-to-speech APIs. I finally reached out to the guy who does Listen Later, and I was like, what do you do here? And he gave me some great advice. It turns out actually that if you use the most modern OpenAI API for text-to-speech, it uses an LLM, and it like doesn't read all the words. It's unbelievable. Like, what? And he was like, yeah, don't do that. Use the older one. The voices aren't quite as good, but it's deterministic. It's like it will read all the words you give it. So that's what I started to do. And I experimented with Google's and OpenAI's, and then I ended up back at OpenAI with the more primitive text-to-speech engine. So that was like step one. And then there's like, then you're shopping for voices, and they're like, well, there's 5 voices at OpenAI that are of decent quality. And I picked 2 that I thought were really good, and then there were 3 others that I was like, these are okay, but I don't think I'm going to go with them. So I'm doing that, and then I'm also going back and forth with Claude Cowork on like, I want to replicate the logic of the newsletter. I only want to put out a podcast if it has those same triggers, and we want to look back in time. So we were really using my script as the basis, but modifying it to have a place where it goes out to the text-to-speech engine. Now, again, you start to iterate, and you realize things like, if it's a link post, I should probably say where the link is going to. So there's a bunch of logic for like, if it's a link post, say this is a link to theverge.com, and how does that work? And do I want to have links to the podcasts in there? I don't, because this is a podcast. If they want to listen to the podcast, they can listen to that podcast. They probably do. So it built similarly, but this time kind of like working with my script as the base and with Claude of like building up how you do text-to-speech, and then a bunch of stuff like, it turns out that you can't give too much speech to the text-to-speech API, so you have to break it up into little bits every few paragraphs. But it turns out that something weird about text-to-speech is like all the audio comes back at different volumes, so you have to normalize everything to get it to be the same volume, because it's like a loud paragraph and then a quiet paragraph. You're like, well, that's no good. I generated so many terrible podcasts. And then it's like, well, I want chapter markers. So we built I had Claude build me a thing that not normalizes everything, but then it puts chapter markers between each article, because I want this to be a good podcast. I decided, and I would listen to these and I would be like, this still doesn't do it. So a lot of posts, we block quote other people's content. We like do a quote and then we comment on it. And I was like, how do you do that in audio? So what I did is I went back to those 3 voices that I didn't think were quite as good, and block quotes are read by those 3 voices, and they just randomly rotate. But it means that when you're reading a story, a voice is reading you the story, and then the quote is read by somebody else, a different voice. And then it goes back to the original voice. And I'm like, that's how you do that in audio. So it's been a lot of iteration like that. And there's still stuff that's missing, like hyperlinks, like normal hyperlinks that go places. There's really no way to do that in audio without it breaking the flow of the writing. I do have it read footnotes out loud, and it actually stops at the footnote and says begin footnote, reads the footnote, and then says end footnote, because I thought I kind of need to have the footnotes in there. Reading them at the bottom out of context doesn't make any sense in audio, so we're going to push those in, but I'm not going to read hyperlinks out loud. That's a bridge too far. And then and like a lot of details, like text-to-speech engine, you can feed it HTML. You can say this is a subhead. It doesn't read them right. So I ended up inserting, like, if you find a subhead, I want this much audio. I want silence before it and after it. Sure. So it feels like there's an actual pause. So it turns out there's a lot of engineering that goes into like art direction or whatever of this podcast to get it to sound like it's actually decent. And then the last one was Glenn Fleischman writes a how-to article for me every Monday. And a lot of times he's got like little snippets of code, like from the terminal. And I ran one of those through, and it was like the thing lost its mind, because it's trying to read terminal commands as sentences, which just no. So again, I had to spend some time with Claude Code, and we like worked on it to like, basically what I said was, because so much of this AI stuff is you're the project manager. And so you're trying to define what the features are and what the behavior is, and then asking it to come up with the code. And in that case, it was, we need a code mode where if something is put in code font, the way it's sent to the TTS engine has to completely change. And like literally we need to map so that if there's a backslash, it says the word backslash. Right. Only in that mode. And it's not perfect, but like it sounds like what a person would say if they were forced to read a terminal command out loud. Obviously, nobody is going to enter in a terminal command based on something they hear in a podcast, but at least you get the context of like type sudo, or sudo, backslash, period, whatever it is, like it sounds like code font in your ears. So that's the story. Is basically I replicated my newsletter script, but it turns out that in going to an audio version, there was an enormous number of new creative decisions that needed to be made to make it sound decent. And I got to say, I'm really proud of it. I think it sounds pretty good. I was unsure whether people would be, I tested it on some of my members. Like, what's the is this usable? Because I didn't want to go down this path if it was not usable. And it turns out that my intuition was right. There are a lot of people who are just not going to read the newsletter or the RSS feed, but who have a lot of podcast time. And the feedback for those people has been really good. Obviously, it's the same content that's everywhere else that we do it, but in a format that like, and I really like the fact that I'm using some good voices. I'm alternating the voices per story. So it's not the same voice for every story. They sort of go, there's a male voice and a female voice, and they kind of alternate female, male, depending on how many stories there are. I love the additional voices for block quotes was a good one. The code thing was a good addition. So it's in a pretty good place. I have no doubt that one of these days somebody's going to say, did you hear the latest one? It's really bad. And I'm going to be like, oh boy, I got to fix that.
Did you think about training 11 labs on your voice and have it be in your voice?
I did. The initial conception of this was that I was like, hey, Dan, Glenn, you open to the idea that we might do some voice cloning and have our cloned voices read it? And let me tell you, so I did a test. It's terrible. That was my answer. It's so bad. It sounds worse than the synthetic voices. It doesn't really sound like me, but it sounds enough like me to be creepy, but also not very good. And so like I'm kind of open to the idea that maybe that would be a future direction, although I don't think it's necessary. I kind of like that it's different. In fact, I like that it's appreciably different. That's one of the reasons why I have, even though most of the contributors to Six Colors are men, not all, but most, I put the female voice at the front because I think it's actually good to say this is not a person who wrote the article. It is a robot, and not, it's we're not trying to replicate my voice or Glenn's voice or John Moltz's voice or Shelley Brisbane's voice. We're not trying to do that. I'm open to the possibility that we might do that in the future if they were really good, but I'm really skeptical if that will happen.
Can I get your...
I actually think even if they got it really good, I'd be a little repelled by it.
Yes.
I know, we talked about this last week.
I've been listening to you for years, and I know your inflection.
I agree. That was what I thought. I thought I was going to be open to it, and then I heard it, and I was like, no.
Okay,
it was a hard no.
I'd like to get both of your live reactions to my clone voice, because there are some times that I do this. Blue Sky is continuing to face intermittent disruptions after what Chief Operating Officer Rose Wang described as an ongoing cyber attack. The company said a sophisticated distributed denial of service attack began around 8:40 p.m.
Okay, the cadence is wrong, but it sounds like
Cadence isn't perfect, but I mean, what do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I will say you are reading, or your synthetic voice is reading a kind of like news headline script.
Correct.
One of the challenges with what I write is it's very voicey a lot of times on Six Colors. And what John Moltz writes is extremely voicey. And it's like, there's no way, like, what I found is that those things are really good. In fact, a lot of these TTS engines, including the 11 Labs clones, one of the contexts is like, what is it doing? Is it soothing? Is it news headlines? And like, news headlines is a speaking style that I think it actually can emulate pretty well.
Yeah.
But once you're like in blog post land and it's very much personal voice, it really falls apart. So I'm not inclined to do it, but I'm open. It was actually the initial idea. And then I was like, no, that's not going to work. Let's go the other way. Can we pivot and find some decent synthesized voices? And that's what I'm optimistic about, is that the synthesized voices are really good, even at weird voicey stuff. I'm amazed they read these sentences like the John Moltz writes that are jokes, and you're like, how's it going to get it? And it doesn't always get it, but there are moments where I'm like, it got the cadence exactly right of what this sentence is supposed to sound like. And I think that the voice clones are going to be behind because they're not being tuned, because they're one-offs, whereas these core voices that are, there are only 3 or 4 of them, are much more sophisticated.
All right, we're talking about podcasting, so let's talk about more podcasting and more power users. Going to get Jason's thoughts too on some video podcasts. So we want to thank our sponsors, Squarespace, Fundera, and 1Password, and thank you to our members who support us directly. We're going to go record more power users. You get access to that. You also can watch the video of it for more power users, and we got another bonus episode coming very soon. So thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.